Okay, so we're going to be in 1 Peter chapter 3, about verse 13. And it'll start out by saying, "Who is there to harm you if you prove zealous for what is good? But even if you should suffer for the sake of righteousness, you are blessed." So you have this double statement that is almost comes across as contradictory. So you start off and you say, look, if you're doing the right thing, if you're zealous, you're passionate for doing what's good, who's going to harm you? And then the very next thing it says is, but even if somebody does harm you and you suffer for the sake of righteousness, you're blessed. So there's these two things put together. If you're zealous to do the right thing, that is a certain level of protection in and of itself. If you're doing the right thing, you're going to get in a lot less trouble. I think we probably all have experienced that in life, right? You try and do the right thing versus trying to do the wrong thing, and it's not 100% guarantee you'll stay out of trouble if you do the right thing, but it does seem to help, right, in the long run. But doing the right thing does not guarantee that. And so he says, even if you should suffer for the sake of righteousness, you're blessed. And then he lists two things that if you suffer, you should not do. Do not fear their intimidation, and do not be troubled. When you have that phrase, do not fear their intimidation, what would be some reasons that a Christian might feel intimidated when they are suffering for the sake of righteousness, as verse 14 says? Now, verse 14 says, you'll be blessed, but do not fear their intimidation. How might we as Christians have to deal with intimidation if we are doing the right thing? What? Do not suffer. Do not fear their suffering. Yeah, even if you should suffer for the sake of righteousness, you're blessed, and do not fear their threats. Okay, so you have intimidation or threats. Yeah. Right, so you might be, I missed part of that, Gwen, sorry. Yeah, you're not doing what's popular. That's right. So you're going against the standard. And part of what Pam said gets a little bit to it. Do not fear their intimidation, or do not fear their threats. So how are they threatening? Or how are they intimidating? They're intimidating through threatening, right? So one of the things let's talk about why do people use the tool of intimidation in the first place? Get you to do what they want to do, right? And intimidation is essentially saying, I have the ability to harm you. I have the ability to cause you to suffer in some way. And so you go to work and you are in a situation where if you choose to do the righteous thing, it's going to put you at odds with your boss. How much your boss intimidates you? Yeah, you have the risk of being fired, right? So intimidation, now, if your boss threatens to fire you, does that mean you are fired? No. That's a great way to put it. Yeah, a lot of it just puts under that single umbrella of fear of loss, right? And it doesn't mean you have lost that. It just means you might, right? I might lose this friendship. I might lose my job. I might lose social standing. And what we're told is, as Christians, do not choose to be righteous based off of what might happen. That make sense? Don't fear their intimidation. Don't fear the potential loss and say, I'm going to live a certain way or make certain choices based off of what might happen or what I might lose. Jesus once asked the Pharisees the question about John the Baptist's baptism. What was their answer? Anybody remember? Jesus says that John the Baptist was his baptism from God or from men. How'd they answer? They said, we don't know, right? They didn't answer. Why didn't they answer? What? Yeah, it would be indictment either way. So they're thinking about the consequences, right? If we say it's from heaven, we have this problem. If we say it's from men, we have this problem. And so they allowed themselves to be concerned about the consequences. If I say this consequence. If I say this consequence. As far as Christians are concerned, we're not supposed to do that. We just ask the question, what's the right answer? And then let the chips fall where they may. So that's the first one, do not fear their intimidation. And then the second one, and this is the harder one, I think, is do not be troubled. And that's not to say that the first one's not hard. Do not be troubled. What does it mean to be troubled? Worry. Yeah, just very simple worry. Anxiety. Right? To wring your hands over things. If I do this, it'll turn out like that. And you have this internal struggle over what will tomorrow be like. How will this turn out? How will it play out? That's not our job. So this is one of the aspects of Christianity that is easy to say, hard to implement. God's in charge of the future. We just do what's right and let everything take care of itself. And I don't have to worry about tomorrow. God will take care of it. We can say it. I could put it on a Hallmark card. But living it's a whole different thing. Because if you've ever had that gut feeling in the pit of your stomach, you know what it means to be troubled. And so here, as Peter is laying out for the Christians, he's telling them, I don't want those things to happen. And then in verse 15, he gives the answers to it. So, and you'll find this pairing in the Bible a lot. There's the do nots, and then there's the do. Because nature doesn't like a vacuum. You can't just simply say, I'm not going to do this. Right? If I tell you, don't think about an elephant. Y'all thought about elephants, didn't you? Right? Nature doesn't like a vacuum. So you have to have something else to put in its place. So don't fear their intimidation. Don't fear their threats. Do not be troubled. And then verse 15 is, this is what you should do, but sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts. Always being ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you, yet with gentleness and reverence. That's the thing to fill the vacuum with. Previously, you worried about intimidation, you worried about and had anxiety about things. Instead, sanctify Christ in your hearts. What does it mean to sanctify? That's a very religious-y word. You don't use that in your everyday language. When was the last time you came out of your cubicle at work and says, let's talk about sanctifying? You don't use it in your everyday vocabulary. What does sanctify mean? What? Cleaning. Okay, so that's part of it. Sanctification involves a cleaning and a purification. Yep, that's it. So you have, and which is why it requires a cleaning and a purification, right? It's to take something and to set it apart. The Greek is from the exact same Greek root as holy. And so it's to treat something as special. So there should be, in this case, a special set apart place in your heart for what? For Christ. He should have a holy location in your heart. There should be a place in your heart where nobody else can touch it but Him. Sanctify Christ in your heart. Set that wall up and say, He is here. I've given my heart to Him. And you can think about that in kind of romantic terms, right? When a man just falls head over heels for a lady. And so he's just given his heart to her. Now, if he's given his heart to her, all the other women in the world just kind of disappear, don't they? Right? He's just, all I can think about is her. Everything else, all of his buddies are not important anymore. Right? He had all these friends, they're all going out and doing stuff. No more. It's just her. That's his whole world. That's the idea. Is we used to live in this way. A lot of what Peter's talking about is you used to live one way, and now I want you to live another way. You used to live where you worried so much about what everybody else thought of you and what they might do to you, and that filled your heart. Now, I want you to do the opposite. I want you to sanctify Christ in your heart. I want you to not worry about the fear, the intimidation, to being troubled, all that sort of thing. And then the next piece of it is, if you've sanctified Christ in your heart, what do you end up doing? What's the verse say? You sanctify Christ in your heart, and then the very next words are, you're ready to make a defense and defend him. And that makes sense, right? Think if a guy falls for a girl and then somebody slanders her name, what does he do? Does he worry about the guy who slandered his girl or his wife's name? Does he worry about that guy, or does he step up and say, absolutely not? What are you doing saying that? Right? He won't put up with it because she's in his heart. The idea here is if we have Christ in our heart, that love for him has grown, that hope in him has grown to such a point, then instead of being intimidated by the world, we step into the battle. We step right into it. And we said, look, I'm here to defend him. And I'm ready to give a defense. And I'm not afraid to give that defense. And so it changes your perspective. You're no longer the person who's dealing with the intimidation, and you're being backed up all the time. I don't know if you've ever felt that way, but I certainly have, where you feel like as a Christian, sometimes you're just constantly being backed up by the culture. He says, no, you can step into the battle because you have Christ in your heart. You're ready to make a defense for him. You are not afraid to give an account for the hope that is within you. So all of these things work together. So the do nots are do not fear intimidation, do not be troubled. The do is sanctify Christ in your heart and then be ready to make a defense. I might add that in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15, it says, make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you. Why would somebody be asking you for the hope that is in you to give an account for that? Exactly. There has to be something they've seen first, right? Yep. Yeah, so implied, I think, in 1 Peter 3:15, I think you're absolutely right, Ryan, is you've been doing something that stood out, and somebody at some point goes, I want to know what you've got that I don't. Why are you doing what you're doing? Why are you living the way you're living? And that goes back to that idea of you can't be intimidated, because we get intimidated to try and be like everybody else to fit in. We're not supposed to fit in. Right? If we fit in, nobody asks you for the hope that is within you because you're just like everybody else. So all of these things, they fit together. That boldness of Christianity allows us to be evangelistic. It allows those conversations to begin. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have to have that. Most of the time, it's like a 10-second window, right? You get a little tiny window to talk and interject Jesus into the conversation. And that means you got to be ready for that window when it shows up. I have a buddy, and he talks about it with when the checker gives you the wrong change. He loves that because he's, of course, going to give the change back, right? No, you gave me too much money. And then they say, oh, thank you. And he goes, of course, I'm a Christian. But he only thinks to say that because he's thought about it ahead of time, right? And so, yeah, John? Yes. That idea of Well, you go back to the Old Testament and you look at the children of Israel in the wilderness. What was the number one thing? When you think of the children of Israel in the wilderness, what's the number one thing they got in trouble for? Complaining, right? They're grumbling, they're whining, they're the little black rain cloud, right? It's never good enough. I'm never happy. I'm always worried. What's going to happen next? Complaining is a sin. And this is one element of why that is, right? Is you do not come across as a hopeful person that people are going to ask for the hope that is within you if you're the Winnie the Pooh rain cloud that just follows right over your head everywhere you go. Okay, anybody have anything else? Yeah. Yeah, great point. Yeah, so if you look at verse 14 there, probably in your Bible, you'll see that it's all caps, which means it's a quotation from the Old Testament. And so that's a quotation from Isaiah. As Corey said, that means this is not a new thing. We've been dealing with this. This is a human thing. Okay. Then my problem with 1 Peter 3:15 is there's so much in there, and I just don't have time to deal with all of it. But some other things to think about on your own is you're giving an account for the hope that's within you, and he does mention then with gentleness and reverence. Right? So these are character traits that we have. So we suffer faithfully, and then even when we give an answer, we do so with a gentle touch, with reverence for God at the same time. And then in verse 16 it says, and keep a good conscience, so that in the thing in which you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ will be put to shame. So one of the things that you have to deal with is that slander, where people will accuse you of this or that. Well, how do you protect yourself against slander? The answer is you beat it to the punch. You live every day with a good conscience. You don't wait for somebody else to condemn you before you change behavior. You constantly ask yourself the question, is this the right thing? Your conscience is the part of you that makes you feel good when you do what you believe is right, and it makes you feel bad when you do what you believe is wrong. That's your conscience. Now, your conscience is not 100% right. For example, we have somebody in the Bible who said, I lived before God in all good conscience my whole life. Anybody know who it was? Paul. Paul, when he was holding the coats of those who were stoning Stephen, said, my conscience is clear. I'm good. So your conscience can be wrong because it has the wrong information. Right? So Paul, when he's holding the coats of those who were stoning Stephen, his conscience didn't condemn him because he did what he thought was right at the time. Once he learned better, then all of a sudden he had a problem and had to deal with it. So your conscience cannot be your lifelong guide. You need the scriptures, you need the truth. But having said that, as a general rule, you should always try and follow your conscience. You should train it. You should give it better information all the time, but try and live in a way that is in good conscience at all times. Because if you're constantly asking yourself, am I being the kind of person that I feel I should be? The chances are when people go to slander you, they're not going to have any ammunition. Because typically, we're the ones who hand them the ammunition, right? Yes. That's a great point, yeah. It goes the other way too, doesn't it? It's not just the Saul doing the wrong thing. You can do the right thing, but not really understand why or be tentative about it and not be able to give a defense for it. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It goes both directions with that. You gotta be sure. You gotta be well grounded in why you are who you are. So, okay. So then from there down in verse 17, this may be if there were a single verse that summed up all of 1 Peter, it might be verse 17 of chapter 3. It's better if God should will it so that you suffer for doing what is right rather than for doing what is wrong. That's what we're talking about this whole time. Suffering is going to happen. It is part of life. But if you're going to suffer, suffer as a Christian. Suffer doing the right thing. Don't suffer for doing the wrong thing. Yes? Oh, absolutely. Joseph is a huge example of somebody who did the right thing over and over and over again, and then, no good deed goes unpunished, right? I mean, he suffered tremendously for it, but it was the right thing, and God wove that together for his good and for the good of those around him. So absolutely, Joseph is a prime example of that idea. Then verse 18 brings up Jesus as being an example of that too. For Christ also died for sins once for all, the just for the unjust, so that he might bring us to God, having been put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit. So here, Jesus died for our sins. He died so you could live a life away from sin. We won't go into depth on that subject, but Romans chapter 6 really hammers on that idea of if Jesus died so that you could be cleansed from sins, don't go back into sinning. Right? He died to pay for it so you wouldn't have it anymore. It would be like, I'm carrying some big heavy load. Theron comes up to me and says, here, Scott, let me take that off of you. And he takes it off and he carries it. And so then I go over and find another heavy load to pick up instead. He's like, no, that's why I took that off. You looked really tired. And we do this with sin so often. Jesus removes the sin, removes it, and then we dive back into it. He says, don't do that. Jesus died so that wouldn't happen. Now, from there we move into one of the trickier sections of all of 1 Peter chapter 3, and really all of 1 Peter, which is this passage that deals with Jesus and the preaching to the people in the days of Noah. So in verse 19, I'm going to read it in its entirety, this first part, in which also he went and made proclamation to the spirits now in prison, who once were disobedient when the patience of God kept waiting in the days of Noah during the construction of the ark, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were brought safely through the water. This is a passage that has caused a lot of consternation for people. I don't think it needs to, but it often does, because it gives this impression of Jesus going and preaching to the spirits that are in prison. And the timing element is what throws us. Because one way to take this is Jesus went and preached to the people of Noah's day when they were in prison, meaning awaiting the judgment day, which has built this whole doctrine. If that's true, then that means that Jesus died on the cross, and then he went down into Hades and preached to these lost souls during Noah's day, which would also make you think if Jesus went to go preach to those people then that would also mean you get a chance after you die, and there's like a whole problem with it. Do you see the problems that you start to run into? You really run into a purgatory sort of idea. There's all sorts of mess. So there's a whole false doctrine tied around the idea that Jesus went and preached to the people of Noah's day after he died on the cross. That's when he went and did it. That's not what this is saying at all. What this passage is saying is, as you look at it, how much patience does God have? How much suffering has Jesus done throughout all the eons, the Father done throughout all the eons to bring people out of sin? And it goes and takes you back to Noah's day. During the days of Noah, how many righteous people were there on the earth? 8. Yes. Yes. 1 confirmed. We make this optimistic assumption that the other 7 were too, right? But that's correct. We only have 1 confirmed, potentially 8. In the whole world. So in this whole world, everybody's wicked and evil. So was Jesus alive during Noah's day? Yes, he was. Was he here on earth? No, he was not. But he was very much alive. Jesus says, before Abraham was, I am. He's always been. So Jesus looks down on the earth and he sees all that's going on. And the Father looks down on the earth and sees all that's going on. and there's one confirmed godly person and his family, and his answer is, burn it all down immediately. Is that what his answer is? No. His answer is wait. And continue to proclaim to them. In the New Testament, we're told Noah was not just an ark builder, he was also a preacher. Right? Scriptures refer to him as Noah as a preacher of righteousness. So Noah's building an ark, but what's he also doing? He's telling people about God, hoping to change them. God sends him out. How patient is God? Everybody's evil except for that small family. And yet here is God saying, I will wait. And so when you look at Noah and the days of Noah, what's being said here, what's being taught is two things. And it's transitional because we're moving from one topic to another. The first topic is suffer. And suffering takes patience, doesn't it? If you're going to suffer, you're going to have to be patient through something that is unenjoyable. That's the pure definition of suffering. It's an unenjoyable circumstance that you endure through. So you need to do it and suffer for doing the right thing because God's always done it. Even back in the days of Noah. So the first thing is, it is an example of Christ's love that has always existed. And then the second part is it's an example of Christ's method of salvation. Because in the end, when all the waiting was over, how were those 8 people saved? Saved them through water, right? That was the method that was used. They were saved from that sinful world through water. God put them in the ark. The waters came, wiped out all the sin on the earth. And so in the like manner, he says in verse 21, corresponding to that, baptism now saves you. And so here, that method of salvation of God using water to save people, he did it during Noah's day, and then during our day, he uses it as well. We're saved through baptism. And he points out, not the removal of dirt from the flesh, but an appeal to God for a good conscience. When you go under the water, it's not about getting your skin clean, is it? It's about appealing to God and saying, God, I want to be cleansed from my sin, and I'm going to do it your way. How should I be cleansed? Right, you have Noah. He wants to be saved from the flood. How is Noah saved from the flood? Through Noah's way or God's way? God's way, right? I'm going to do what God says to be saved through the flood. In the same way, if we want to be saved, we appeal to God for a good conscience the way God desires for us to appeal to Him through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, which is what baptism is, right? When you go into the water, Romans 6 says you're buried with Him, you come out of the water, and you're resurrected with Him. So baptism is that thing that saves you through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Anybody have any comments or questions or anything? Yes? Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Right. So you have don't fear the intimidation. I'm sure Noah faced intimidation and threats. Don't be troubled. All of these things that we're being told to do, Noah's already done it, and we know how that worked out for him. So yeah, you're absolutely right. You have this really clear parallel of, look at what this guy did, and we consider him righteous and blessed for doing it, so too for us. Any other comments or questions? Okay, so from there we're going to move into chapter 4. And in chapter 4, he says, therefore, since Christ has suffered in the flesh, arm yourselves also with the same purpose, because he who has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin, so as to live the rest of the time in the flesh, no longer for the lusts of men, but for the will of God. So one of the aspects of suffering is, if you are suffering, if we're suffering for good, we are ceasing from sin. Right? So if I'm going to go this way and I say I'm going to do the right thing, Well, what if it costs me something? I'm still going to do the right thing. Well, what if people don't like me? I'm still going to do the right thing. What if it gets hard? I'm still going to do the right thing. What if it doesn't seem like I'm ever going to be rewarded for it? I still do the right thing. If I'm always going to do the right thing no matter what, and I'm going the right way, what way am I not going? I'm not going the wrong way. If you've ever wondered, like, I have this sin in my life and it's just been kicking my teeth in, and I can't seem to kick it. I can't seem to break the habit. I've been doing it so long, and I just wonder if I'm just stuck with this my whole life. And you want the tools to get rid of sin in your life, especially pervasive sin that just, it's just kind of been with you. It's almost like, you know, that thing that has dogged you your whole life. This is the answer to it. Figure out whatever the right thing is. Right? The opposite of that sin. For every foolish thing, there's a wise opposite. Right? So figure out what the folly is, and it has a wise counterpart, and then just say, I'm going to do that wise thing, whatever that right thing is, I'm going to do that, even when it's hard, and even when I face threats or intimidation, and even when I don't feel like doing it, and even if it just hurts. Doesn't this fly in the face of what we're used to hearing? If something isn't fun and it doesn't make me happy, what does the world tell you to do? Just stop, right? If I'm not enjoying it and I don't like it, just stop. Do what makes you happy. That's the siren's call of the culture that we're in. This is the opposite. If we suffer for doing good, assumes doing the right thing will not always feel right. So sometimes you're doing the right thing and you go, man, this just doesn't feel good. Like you got a problem in your marriage, and so you start trying to show love to your spouse, and it's not working. That's what it feels like. You're trying to be a better husband, you're trying to be a better wife, and they are just not reciprocating. And you're like, this isn't working. This isn't any fun. I give and I give and I give, and they're not giving it back, and I'm not getting anything out of it, and it's just not working. Our society says, just end it. Just be done. That's not what your Bible says, though. The Bible says, look, do the right thing, and sometimes it won't feel right. But do it anyways. Anybody who's ever learned an instrument knows that. If you ever started learning an instrument or started learning a new language, any sort of new skill set typically comes with that sort of thing. Right? When you first start to learn it, how does it feel? Totally awkward, right? You go to learn guitar and you first start to do it and your fingers just hurt. And you feel like for the first time in your life, like, why can't I move my fingers where I want them to? I have some sort of strange velociraptor hands, right? And it's just because it's new to you. That feeling and adjustment, it's new and it hurts and it's uncomfortable. And everybody has to go through that. And what is every guitar teacher going to tell you? Stick with it. That's right. Push through. Keep at it. You'll get there. And the reason we all don't know how to play guitar is either you've never tried or you've done what so very many people did, is you tried and you stuck with it for like a week and then it got hard. And no shame, I have a guitar in my house that is completely ornamentally there, right? Because I've done that weak thing like 5 times. So if you're going to do things right, you're going to have to make a choice to do the hard thing. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Over time, the calluses show up, the dexterity shows up, it becomes muscle memory. You can handle it. What was once hard becomes easy, but it doesn't happen immediately. And a lot of times you don't even realize it's happening. It's just like you wake up down the road at some point and go, oh, I can kind of do this okay now. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if I'm going to learn guitar, I can sit on my own and just try and figure it out like I've always done and last about a week. Or there is another option. I could get lessons, right? I could ask somebody to help me, somebody who I was going to be accountable to because I'm going to have to go see them once a week, and they're going to help me through that process and make sure that I'm learning good habits and not more bad ones. Yeah, Proverbs, you talk about the foolish thing versus the wise thing. Proverbs is very clear, in a multitude of counselors there's safety, right? So this doesn't mean doing it in isolation. It means doing it and absolutely arm yourself with whatever tools, including people. People are tools. Don't take that statement in isolation. People are meant to help you be better at things. And so find somebody who's already good at what you're doing. Find somebody who maybe in a professional capacity can help you. Whatever it is, yeah, you don't need to do it in isolation. This is not the, I'm going to gut it out and do it all on my own. That is an anti-biblical thought process. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Yeah. It was a pet. Yes. Best oversimplification of Job ever. Um, right. Yeah, the goal is not success within the 60, 80 years here. That's not what we're shooting for. You may get that, but that's not the goal. The goal is on the other side of the veil. Absolutely. Okay, so then from there, if you move on down about verse 3, he says, "For the time already past is sufficient for you to have carried out the desire of the Gentiles, having pursued a course of sensuality, lust, drunkenness, carousing, drinking parties, and abominable idolatries. In all this they are surprised that you do not run with them into the same excesses of dissipation, and they malign you." So the first question we have is, we need to ask ourselves, how much time does sin deserve in our life? Because what he says here in verse 3 is that the time has sufficiently passed for you to be in sin. In other words, you've already spent enough time doing these things, living like the rest of the world. You've given enough of your life to that. And he's speaking to these early Christians, who many of them would have been Gentile Christians from a non-Jewish background. And so he says, look, you've known that world. You know what it's like out there. You gave it a portion of your life. At what point are you going to say, sin's had enough time? Sin's had enough of me? And when we put it in that phrasing, when we begin to say, well, really, how much time of my time does sin deserve? Well, the answer becomes very simple. How much time of your life does sin deserve? 0, right? It doesn't deserve any. So, should I not be making a plan to give it less of my time, less of my life, less of my effort? If there are things in my life that I am still doing that match the person I was before I came to Christ, not the person I'm trying to be now that I'm trying to be transformed and conformed to Christ, enough time's passed. What do I need to do to make those changes? You have those conversations with yourself. And then The next is simply that following Christ means we don't run with the pack. They're going to be surprised that you do not run with them. We've talked about this quite a bit. So you're not going to go in the same excess. You're not going to live the same way that they do. You're swimming upstream at this point. And so as we progress through and look at it, there is this pattern being laid out of be different. And to be different will mean you will suffer, but it also means that suffering will help you to be as you ought to be. Right? So it has this impact of, yes, you will suffer for doing the right thing, but that suffering will help you to cease from sin. It will help you to be more evangelistic. It'll give you more opportunities to tell people about Jesus. And you'll know more about Jesus, too, because when you suffer and then you read passages about Jesus suffering, they'll make more sense to you. So all of these things, they begin to fit together like that. Any comments or questions? Okay, so we're going to